Well, actually, since I finished graduate school at Indiana University with Alma Eicherman, I made up my mind at the end of my program that what I wanted to do was build sculptures to wear. I was looking at an Art in America issue that was devoted to David Smith at that time, and I, of course, love his work. But I thought, ooh, how exciting it would be to be able to go put your arm through a hole or your head through a hole or whatever. So that was what helped inspire me to begin building body sculptures. I'm in the jewelry field, but a lot of people don't even call it jewelry. It sometimes is difficult to define. And so sometimes instead of calling myself a jeweler, I'll say that I build body sculptures. I think it fits the idea of what I'm doing better. When we'd hang faculty shows, they'd say, "Oh, Marge, why don't you just close up those neck holes and those arm holes and admit that you're a frustrated sculptor?" I see the body as a challenge, not as a limitation. I build these large-scaled forms that most of them are sort of pushing at the boundaries of wearability and making us question why we wear what we do, why we don't wear these kinds of things. So I've stayed focused all these years in that respect and continuing to work in that direction.
The studio craft movement was, in the mid-20th century, was developing in an interesting way. And it was part of really a cultural change among young people especially, where anything was possible. So Marge, I think, benefited from that kind of freedom and overall environment in Madison first, and then with Alma Eicherman, where she developed some really amazing work very early. It's interesting to see her metalwork that she was doing as a student. It was exceptional in terms of the imagination and the sculptural quality, but usually in silver or gold or and not non-precious materials. What was interesting is that Marjorie began to explore non-precious materials in the 60s, first with the paper mache. And that was definitely a pioneering effort for her to explore that. Marjorie brought these bracelets to my office, and I looked at them, and obviously I knew they were interesting and important, and I went out of the room to the adjoining room to where a couple of curators were, and I showed the work. And she was very concerned that I went out of the room. She thought she had done something wrong. When I came back, I said, well, these are just great because we are planning a major exhibition called Made with Paper next year. Her very early work in non-media had its first showing in a museum in New York City in 1968.
I didn't even know what I was looking at, even though I was educated in contemporary jewelry, but her work was just far out. It was very colorful, it was very big, very vibrant, and it was, I would almost say, and maybe she was the first person who really showed wearable sculptures with the accent on sculpture. Like, wow, this is just amazing work. And why is it amazing? Well, because it challenges us in so many ways about what jewelry is. And I think in that respect, Marge was just unbelievably inspiring. She opened up a whole world, and all these issues about wearability, I mean, she didn't really care about it because she basically started from the point of view like, of course it's wearable, you know, it's big, yes, so you have to pay attention.
She is a central figure in the history of post-World War II modern and contemporary crafts.
You know, she dynamically changed through her abstracted vision the way in which we perceived contemporary jewelry here, not in Europe, but here. She was pushing me into realms that I didn't know about and pushing everybody else. And within this was this effervescent, quiet, deeply intelligent. She was not pretentious, she was humble. She cared deeply about the history of modern and contemporary jewelry. And she also cared deeply about breaking barriers and making us think and perceive ways of ornamentation that didn't exist before.
I think Marjorie has been a huge influence on American craft over time. She's really, you know, the only American jewelry artist I hear of as doing the same thing with the new jewelry movement that was happening in the UK and in Europe. She was really a major force, and a quiet major force, you know. I don't think she was super aggressive about getting her work in collections or anything. And just really now she's coming into museum collections and things like that. I think looking back at her career and her body of work over time, and then looking at other artists around her, you can really see the influence that she's had. She's really doing incredibly innovative things in the middle of the country without much outside influence, and I mean that just totally speaks to her incredible brain, her innovation, and I mean, she was really a genius. The things that she was able to do. I think doing what Alma taught them to do, that really helps you develop your style. You know, if you're zoning into one specific part of the piece and having to sort of repeat that as you continue the piece, that really helps you tune into your artistic style. And her pieces are just, they're so elaborate and so intricate, and trying to describe one of the works that we acquired, you know, for our database, it's just like, oh, there's the orange band here, and then, you know, nothing really repeats itself. It's all very bland spontaneity. I don't know. It doesn't feel repetitious. It just, her pieces, every single element, there was something to it. Nothing was forgotten.
When I look at her early work, I think more about her being a little bit more in step with the art movements that was going on. And then when I think about her getting to maybe more of the painted canvas and the papier-mâché, I think maybe she was a little bit more not in sync with what was going on. And I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean that in a very good way, in that she really had her own voice and her own vocabulary, and that she didn't feel like she had to be in parallel with the art movements of the time. The museum has a fantastic piece called Blue Eyes, and which was, I think, done in the very early 60s. And I think about that piece as really reflecting the interest in culture, in mobiles, and those. So I see that more like in concert with what was going on artistically at the time. When I look at something like for Perth, her papier-mâché piece that's also in the Nelson Atkins collection, I think of that being a little outside of the mainstream of what art was in the 80s and 90s. There's something really intimate about the way she worked and the materials she worked with, which are really everyday materials. I mean, I made papier-mâché. We all made papier-mâché as children, and yet Marjorie took it to another level. Or taking just simple wooden dowels and string and making those into something else. And yet the things that she made were so big that, I mean, to wear them, you're wearing almost a suit of armor, or you're wearing a dress, or you're wearing a costume, or you're, as I said before, your body is completely transformed. So I think there's always her working with what's small and she can do in her studio that's not about foundries and pouring bronze, but much more intimate, and yet the scale of the work that she made was so completely different from that.
The biggest contribution is her existence and her, you know, mentorship through being in every book that I pick up that was like Dormer's new jewelry book. There she is, you know, one-of-a-kind jewelry. There she is, just like constantly surprising, constantly amazing, bridging and hybridizing between the metal culture, kind of the metal skill, but then taking it the painting, aspect of surface treatment and combining it with three-dimensional sculpture, all in the context of the body frame, or not, And to me, that was like, whoa, this is cool. And for this young metalsmith to see that totally led the way to me thinking, you know what, yeah, I'm trained as a goldsmith, and yeah, I know how to do that stuff. I'm sure I love design, but I can actually, there are no limits. I can go crazy. And that, she was instrumental in opening that door.
She talks about everyone else. She talks about her husband, Jim, and how influential he was on her career, and about Rob, her son, and how inspiring he was, and how he inspired many pieces. But it was always back to the work and to the students and to the other people and the inspirational moments and the teaching. It was always back to being a teacher and how much she loved educating and inspiring those people with objects and then the things that they went on to do. I think that Marjorie was a painter, just a sculptural painter, a three-dimensional painter, because she really created surfaces as a way to get color into them. I mean, in her piece, the blooming necklace that we just recently acquired, it's this fabulous wooden collar, and it has this kind of large wooden piece with these balls in it, and it just radiates color. It's a ring of color, and I think she really saw her pieces not necessarily as jewelry first and foremost. She was able to figure out what material she needed to create the surface and to create the form that would get her the most colorful object, the most engaging form that could come to life when worn. Canvas and wood and dowel rods, she was really thinking about the lines that she was creating and where they were going to merge and what it was going to look like in form and in space. She always talked about her first experience in graduate school was thinking about what it would be like to put her head in a David Smith sculpture and feel that kind of weight and that structure and that form. And you can see that throughout her work. I think she was really interested in taking things from everyday life and from being a human being in the world, and taking references from pop culture or the piece It's a Boy Named Rob that she reflected on later in life, the invitations or the baby announcements, and then the piece about Pittsburgh, the brick piece where she made and painted those beautiful bricks that mimic the bricks in Pittsburgh. And other pieces from different residencies that she did were all named after them. I think she was really tied to material, but also really thinking about materiality and place and what it means to be in a place and really live and exist in the world and grapple with those things.
One thing that I remember about her painting is she always used the paint directly from the tube. She didn't mix her own colors. And that was because she knew she was going to have to go back and repair them someday. And she didn't want to have to try and find that mix again. She would use the colors as they were from the tube. Of course, she had every color you could imagine, but there was never any mixing of colors to create a custom color. Every aspect of a piece was considered. The front, the back, the inside, the stand for it. Nothing was left untouched. Her hand touched every single part of every piece. You can't see any of the detail. You can't experience the piece through a photograph. And I remember working on that piece, and it started off with, I don't remember, I think there were 8 bracelets or 10 bracelets. I can't remember how many there were, but it was 2 rectangular frames, and then there were little dowels in between each one, and those were painted and those were placed in a certain order, and then the edges of the wooden frames were painted in a gradation that's opposite from the other side. So every single component of every piece is completed, and then she put together dozens of those fully formed elements.
When she talked about contemporary art jewelers, and she showed slides. And then I realized at some point she knew these people. These were her colleagues globally. And then she would go in her office and pull out a little box, and then there would be the actual pieces from these artists. And so it became evident to me that there was a Marjorie Schick outside of the art building that was a lot more
fabulous in what she was letting on, and it was just amazing to me that she knew the people in these books, and then, oh wait, she was in the book. She would gloss over that detail, and always humble. One of the most important things that she ever said to me was, we were in the studio working, and she stopped and she said to me, she said, Janet, you know that I've never fit. And I was thinking, she was, well, yeah, she's pretty nonconformist. This really, it didn't surprise me when she said that, and I thought, well, is she surprised by that? And she looked at me, and she had a level of seriousness that I wasn't used to seeing from her. And she said, no, Janet, I'm serious. I have never fit. And she said, but it's okay. And I thought, I get it. And I have heard that in my head all these years. When you have that moment, you think, I don't think I fit. But it's okay, because Mrs. Schick said it was okay. And that's how she was. Her whole take on her own career was that she got lucky. She had all these great people that helped her. She was always different, but I do think she meant it. She meant that it was okay. But when she was here, packing things up was a very lengthy process, but it was also, I think, very meaningful for her to go through those past catalogs and shows and correspondence. And there was a part of that, I think, that she needed to do it at her pace, to feel like she could part with those. I mean, because it's the originals. That was a lot of history that she was saying goodbye to at that time. And the thing about her making her work, that has always been, I think, when she was stressed or she didn't know, something, that was the way that she renewed herself, was to be in the studio working. You would always see her car out in front of the building, and so when we would drive past, when she was here, we'd say, well, do you think she's packing those papers? Do you think she's making new pieces? I told her we had said that, and she said, oh, I was working on a new piece.
They say that energy can never be lost, that it just changes form. You go into a museum and you see a Marjorie piece, that's her talking to you and inspiring you.